Joseph Stalin, icon of the 20th century, personification of Soviet might, catalyst of the Cold War, hero to some, monster to many, the man of steel who brought the Soviet Union to the world stage and helped end World War II while simultaneously terrorizing his own people and bringing his fellow communists to their knees. What was previously viewed as a backwards country, a country of peasants and farmers, quickly rose to a world superpower under his determined sociopathic drive. The numbers vary wildly, mostly due to propaganda and secrecy, but estimates range from a conservative 3 million deaths to a terrifying 60 million murders under his long, horrific reign. And today we dig into his life, beliefs, accomplishments, crimes, and more on a cold-blooded, communistic edition of Timesuck.
You're listening to Timesuck.
Happy Monday, suckers. Hail Nimrod. Praise Bojangles. Praise Lucifina. Or begone Lucifina. Not sure what to do with her sometimes. I like a naughty female authority figure. I'm Dan Cummins. This is Timesuck. Recording from the Suck Dungeon again today with Media Maestro, Triple M, and Jimmy Ingram, apprentice / crooner, Joshua Krell. So much cool shit happening right now. A couple big announcements. Very excited about it. I have a new album I am very happy with called Maybe I'm the Problem, and it's dropping this week. And for the first 90 days, you can hear it only on Pandora. And you get to listen to that album as an album, no bouncing around to other various tracks for free. So click the link in today's podcast description to listen to my new stand-up album, Maybe I'm the Problem, on Pandora Premium for free. The link gives you a free 30-minute trial of Pandora Premium, so when time is up, just come back, click the link again, and you'll have enough time to finish the new album. Again, for free. You don't have to be a paying Pandora user to listen. This is a special feature Pandora worked out just for this album. How fucking cool is that? Also, the link only works on your mobile phone, and if you're still having trouble, just make sure to update your Pandora app so you have the newest version of the app, and that should take care of it. So check that out and let me know what you think. Finally, I also have some secret suck news for you future space lizards. The Patreon account is live for those of you who want to sign up early to become space lizards next month. You won't be charged $5 until February 1st. It's $5 a month, and that's when the new Space Lizard features arrive on the app and the website. That's when a second album, Feel the Heat, more stand-up will be available for Space Lizards and Space Lizards only. You get the download link so you can listen to that bad boy, put it in whatever device you want. And that's also when the first piece of Space Lizard exclusive merch comes out. February is when the Secret Suck podcast comes out, when you can vote on topics and all that fun stuff. So the age of the Space Lizard, almost here. Link to the Patreon profile that is your ticket into the exclusive world of being a Space Lizard in the episode description. And Patreon, by the way, just being used to collect the $5 a month. You won't have to go to Patreon to get features of this new podcast. It'll be right there in the app, right there on the Timesuck website for you Space Lizards to enjoy. Just, portions of the app, portions of the website that only Space Lizards can access. So can't wait to see how far we can push this whole Space Lizard concept. Working on some new secret Space Lizard handshakes with the fam right now. I'm not even joking. Working on some secret codes, code of ethics, all kinds of stuff. Gonna have a real fun club going here real soon. A cult of the curious. So, all right, very excited about all of that. Also, thanks to you Providence, Rhode Island suckers who came out this past weekend. Muy apreciando, which is Spanglish for you guys are the fucking best. That's how it translates. More shows this weekend. Philadelphia, get out to the Punchline, January 25th, 27th. Tickets have been selling fast. Make sure you grab those. Get to Baltimore Sunday night, January 28th, Magoobies. Chicago, January 31st through February 3rd. Tell me you're coming to Zanies. It's an amazing comedy club. One of my favorites in the country for sure that I performed at. Going to be at the Gotham Comedy Club in New York City, one night only, and that is going to be February 11th, so be sure and get those tickets. Detroit, February 16th at the Magic Bag in Ferndale with the boys from Small Town Murder. One show is the Swapcast. The other is stand-up, but I believe it is sold out. If not, there is literally just a handful of tickets left. Minneapolis, March 2nd and 3rd. Podcast sold out. Stand-up tickets still available. And the stand-up right now is very Timesuck-esque, so you will enjoy it if you're not necessarily a stand-up fan. Cleveland, Hilarities, March 22nd to 24th. Live podcast, Spokane, Washington. One show only, Sunday, May 6th. More announcements at the end of the show, including that very special Timesucker update that I teased last week. And now, suck on some Stalin. All right, suckers. Before we suck on Stalin, before a little Joseph, slam himself into my brain hole, let's go over some communistic terminology. The following terms and brief bios are given in no particular order of significance to today's tale. There is the proletariat. The proletariat is the laboring class, especially the class of industrial workers who lack their own means of production and hence have to sell their labor to live. It is the lowest social or economic class of a community, and those are your factory workers, your maids, your butchers, construction workers, the people boxing up your Amazon goods, people packing up your groceries, etc., etc., etc. Then you have the bourgeoisie. Now, the bourgeoisie are members of the middle and upper class. Class are a group of people with social behavior and political views held to be influenced by private property interest, a social order dominated by capitalists. This is how Merriam-Webster defines the term. I define the bourgeoisie as old money and go-getters, right? Just people doing some shit. Now, but when talking about how communists use the term, the bourgeoisie is the factory owner, the landowner, the person controlling the means of production, the people who hire the proletariat, the people who make their money off of the labor of the proletariat and also can exploit them and sometimes do, the people who manually stimulate farm animal genitalia for fun and profit. If the proletariat are the have-nots, then the bourgeoisie are the haves and the animal diddlers. They are the elite diddling ruling class. Now, I just made up that farm animal genitalia. Not sure that is a societal role of any sort, and it certainly has nothing to do with the bourgeoisie. Damn you, Lucifina, for encouraging such tasteless depravity in the suck. Now let's talk about Marxism. Marxism is the belief that proletarian revolutions are a natural, inevitable consequence of capitalist societies, resulting in socialist societies that eventually transform into classless, stateless, communist societies. Karl Marx's theory of what he saw is the natural evolution of humanity. Basically, Marx felt that socialism would inevitably give way to communism. Communism is defined as a system in which goods are owned in common and are available as needed to all, like a theory advocating total elimination of private property. So what really is the difference between socialism and communism? Basically, communism is an extreme form of socialism. If socialism is someone who likes to cut loose on the weekend, communism is someone who is fucked up at work Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. And it's not from the night before. It's from one of the several flasks they have hidden around the office. Under communism, individuals are provided for or compensated based on their needs, in effect meaning that in a true communist system, you wouldn't have money, and you'd simply be given what the government thinks you need to survive in terms of food, clothing, accommodation, etc. Sounds fucking terrible. Central to socialism is that individuals are compensated based on their individual contribution. People that work harder or smarter receive more than those who don't contribute. Socialism sees individuals still having their personal property, but all industrial and production capacity is communally owned, managed by consensus or by government. Socialism is the diet version of communism. Socialism is at its core an economic philosophy, whereas communism is economic and political in its requirement that the government be the central owner and decision maker in all matters. Mother Russia will take care of you. Give all your goods and talent and heart and soul to Mother Russia, and she will provide you with her communist teat for you and your family to suckle on to get everything you need there, good comrade. Essentially, if socialism were religion, communism would be a cult. In a socialist society, you could have socialized healthcare, socialized education, but you could also make a lot more money than your neighbor. It can be a little complicated because two governments can be both labeled socialist but actually operate quite differently. Like Canada and Sweden have socialist elements to their governments. Canadian citizens don't have to worry about a medical tragedy bankrupting them like we do here in the U.S. And in Sweden, you won't be crippled with student loan debt for college because college tuition is free. You can still go into massive debt as a college student in Sweden based on the high cost of living as far as rent, groceries, etc. go, but tuition itself, free. That's the socialist element. One class can't buy their way into a better education the same way that you can do in the States. And in both those examples, you can become a wealthy private citizen still. Here in America, the term socialist tends to have an extremely negative connotation, even among the poor, which I've always found to be odd. If higher education isn't socialized to some degree soon, odds are pretty soon your kid is not going to go to a good school unless he or she is rich. The real cost of higher education and how it affects our society at large, that's an entirely different suck we got to get into someday. But again, socialism doesn't have to be the opposite of capitalism. Like Marcus Persson, he's that Swedish citizen who founded Minecraft. You've probably heard of it. If you're a parent, you definitely have. Been a billionaire since his mid-30s. That motherfucker. I'm very jealous, openly jealous. Who wouldn't want all that sweet video game money? And he gets nearly free healthcare if he decides to leave his Beverly Hills mansion and visit his homeland in Sweden, which I doubt he does, doubt he needs to do, since he has enough money to just, go buy an entire IKEA store just on a whim. And that's socialism. You can still get rich. Not so with communism. Communism is anti-capitalism. It's socialism minus all of the fun parts. And communism has never worked out in reality like it does in theory. It always ends up being an oppressive shit show. Think about how Jim Jones' little experiment with communism ended up in South America, with everybody dead. Under communism, in its true Marxist theoretical ideal form, you wouldn't have more than your neighbor, everyone's fucking equal, everybody gets along, everything's fair in the sense that everyone leads, their equally shitty, depressing, hopeless life. College would be free, but you'd also be dependent on the state for everything. You work at a collective farm, or as a teacher, or as a lawyer, and the state gives you what you need to live. However, that everyone is equal shit only works in theory. Even in Russian early 20th century communism, some people still had more than others. Higher ranking party members, those in better favor of the Communist Party, they lived in the nicer houses. They drove the better cars, ate better food, etc. They also worried about the real threat of the state being able to take everything away from them at any second. It's like in North Korea, Timesuck episode 45. The state decides where you live. Do you get a nice house? Or do you get a shithole apartment? Do you live downtown or out in some, fucking piney village? It depends on what your value is to the state and how loyal you are to the state. If you are an important scientist developing important military secrets for the state, you're going to live in a nicer place than some dull-eyed motherfucker peeling potatoes in a shed. However, if you suddenly get in a car accident and your scientist brain don't work no good no mo, we know what? There goes your value. There goes your nice digs. Have fun peeling those spuds there, Dr. Dodo Brain. Communism, while I like its theoretical focus on equality and the impoverished not being continually exploited like they can be under capitalism, has always sounded like a nightmare to me. Well, one version of communism in early 20th century Russia was Leninism, based on the philosophy of Vladimir Lenin. Lenin was the leader of the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. He was the architect, builder, the first head of the Soviet Union. We heard a little bit about him in Timesuck 47, Rasputin. He's one of those guys that really helped bring down the long reign of the Russian czars, and move Russia away from being a monarchy. And Leninism, like Marxism, believes that a proletarian revolution is inevitable in a have-not society, and that socialism follows and leads to communism. However, he believed that a proletarian dictator needed to lead the way from socialism to communism. The people need a firm leader to make everything fair for everyone. A leader who you cannot question without fear of death. A leader that you don't get to ever vote out of office, ever. Just, hey guys, this king shit is not working. We need a new, totally different system where essentially one guy is in charge. Wait, what? That's what we already had. An equal society where everyone is given equal treatment. A communal society with a single, firm-handed leader who decides who lives, who dies, who gets anything. Okay, that sounds fucking worse than the monarchy, actually. How convenient for Lenin. Okay, a little bit more about this Lenin son of a bitch. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, a.k.a. Lenin, a name that was a pseudonym, actually. A lot of these Bolsheviks had to have pseudonyms to stay hidden from the czars before the revolution hit. Led Soviet Russia and Soviet Union from 1917 to 1924. He was the leader of the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 and held connections with the group that unseated the Romanov family, ended the monarchy system of government, replacing it with communist ideals. He was well-educated, well-cultured, an avid reader, came from a wealthy middle class and politically active family, and he had watched as a young boy as his father's job as a public school inspector was threatened due to the government's fear of education. He bore witness to the tragic loss of his older brother, Alexander, who was executed for participating in a plan to assassinate Tsar Alexander III. If you remember that from the Rasputin episode, Alexander was Tsar Nicholas's father. Later in life, as a young man, Vladimir would be exiled for participating in political protests, which only led to a more solidified and radical set of beliefs for him. During his time in exile, spent primarily in Switzerland, London, and Munich, he read voraciously, mostly reading American comic books such as Pootie and Juju, a slapstick precursor to the humor of Charlie Chaplin and Abbott and Costello. Pootie and Juju were known mostly for their famous back and forth, of stuff like, well, I never said nothing nohow, Pootie. And then, zip it, Juju, you sure squawk a lot for someone who ain't never said nothing. And they also coined somewhat famous phrases. Put it in your lunchbox, Shirley. Park it in the shed. And too little, too diddle, Pootie. And somehow the Pootie and Juju stories kind of softened Lenin's initial thoughts on communism and helped turn him into kind of more of a benevolent leader who didn't take himself too seriously. Yeah, right. Lenin was a self-serious man, very self-serious man who had never called benevolent. Dude was a cold-blooded killer, and he didn't give two shits about Pootie and Juju. No one cared about it. It was a very, very unpopular comic book, due primarily to the fact that it never existed. Too little, too diddle, Pootie. Anyway, I can't wait to hear how many of you believed in Pootie and Juju for a while. Anyway, Lenin particularly found purpose and power in works by Karl Marx, and in 1889, he declared himself a Marxist. Lenin went on to become a lawyer, often had clients from the peasant class. This gave him firsthand accounts and witness to what Lenin viewed as an unfair, unjust, class-based system. He solidified his role as an advocate for the proletariat class. Again, in 1895, after continued activity with Marxist groups and political protests, he was exiled to Siberia for a period of 3 years. That was a popular move for the czars, man. Someone's a problem, fucking kick him out to Siberia. He moved to Munich for a short time before returning to St. Petersburg and intensifying his political efforts. In the early 1900s, under the failing leadership of Tsar Nicholas II, the communist movement gained traction, and Lenin split from many of his Marxist allies in the Menshevik Party, creating the Bolsheviks in opposition. And he was exiled again, this time spending most of his days in Switzerland reading those comic books. Put it in your lunchbox, Shirley. On the heels of World War I, Lenin returned home to a war-weakened country. Lenin rallied under the slogan of peace, land, bread, appealing to the peasant proletariat class who had been deposed, and weary of fighting for decades, and had become increasingly wary of the bourgeoisie. By the way, how shitty are conditions in your country when you can rally a revolution around peace and bread? Not going to get a lot of followers in 2018 America promising more bread for people. When you can get free loaves of bread brought to your tables at so many restaurants. Texas Roadhouse, by the way, fucking great bread. In 1917, Lenin led the October Revolution, overthrew the provisional government that had been set up after the ousting and murder of the Romanov family. Civil war followed, and Lenin developed a ruthless strategy to maintain control that became known as the Red Terror. Too little, too diddle, Pootie. Effectively, all opposition was murdered, which technically is the best way to get rid of the competition. Hard to beat constant murder of those who oppose you if you can pull it off. I mean, Starbucks, it's super popular. Sure it is. But they would have a much bigger market share if they just started bombing the fuck out of their competition. Like literally bombing them, just razing their buildings to the ground. Caribou Coffee, Dutch Brothers, Tim Hortons, Dunkin' Donuts, just whoever else opposed their iron caffeinated will. Famine, poverty, and unrest filled Lenin's reign. Leon Trotsky and Joseph Stalin became part of his elite circle and necessary governmental tools. Trotsky was a showman and an idealist. Stalin was brute force. On his deathbed, Lenin expressed regret for the way his rule failed in communist theory and emerged as a dictatorship, and he warned his closest allies to be wary of Joseph Stalin and Stalin's climb to power. Now let's talk about Trotskyism. Leon Trotsky was one of the architects with Lenin of the Bolshevik Revolution and also a Marxist. Another communistic revolutionary, he disagreed with Stalin on various aspects of communism, especially when it came to the end of goal of communism, which he believed to be essentially eating as many tasty kind of capitalist babies as you can. That's definitely the weirdest aspect of Trotskyism, the focus on infant capitalist cannibalism. No. Unlike Stalin, Trotsky wanted to take over the entire world and rebuild it in this kind of communist image, and he wanted to do it quickly. He was a big advocate of one world government. He felt a natural evolution of the revolution was to spread communism globally, whereas Stalin wanted to focus on building communism within Mother Russia and make Mother Russia, the central power of the world, and there can be satellites, but, none as powerful as they are, and they're their own nation. After Lenin's death, he vied for control of the Communist Party with Stalin, and when Stalin rose to power, he was exiled and then later killed by a Stalin assassin. A little more info on Leon and his eventual assassination, pretty intense. Born Lev Bronstein Trotsky, Leon was an avid Marxist who was initially part of the Menshevik Party, as was Lenin. Just before the October Revolution of 1917, he joined the Bolshevik Party under Lenin and quickly rose in ranks and became one of the 7 leading members of the party. In the early days, under Lenin, he served as the People's Commissar of Foreign Affairs, later became the founder and commander of the Red Army. He received high praise for his leadership in ending Russia's civil war. Trotsky was an excellent orator, well-cultured and intelligent. He knew that violence was a necessary means in a revolution, but he didn't have the stomach to be as ruthlessly violent like Stalin did. Stalin and Trotsky were in many ways opposites. After Lenin's death and Stalin's hostile rise to power, Trotsky was stripped of his duties, banned from the Communist Party, and eventually exiled from the entire country. Despite all of this, he never ceased to be an outspoken opponent of Stalinism. After several European homes, Trotsky and his wife eventually moved to Mexico in 1936 and were warmly accepted by President Lázaro Cárdenas. They lived in Coyoacán, a neighborhood in Mexico City, with famed artists and admirers Frida Kahlo and her husband Diego Rivera. Trotsky went on to have an affair with Frida and published a book titled The Revolution Betrayed, a harsh attack on Stalin's rule. In 1939, after a fallout with Diego Rivera, no doubt related to his affair with Frida, husbands tend to get like really annoyed at people they admire when those people fuck their wives. Trotsky and his wife moved to a nearby home. Shortly thereafter, in the summer of 1939, Trotsky was assassinated with an ice axe. Seriously, an ice axe. Buried one a couple inches into his skull. An ice axe looks like an ice pick on one side, and it's like a short steel wedge on the other. I don't know if you've ever seen a Pulaski. Growing up in Idaho and living out in the country as a kid, I used one. It's like a little kind of like shovel-like tool. Kind of like firefighters use them to help kind of like carve out, perimeters around fire. It's like a Pulaski has like a axe on one side and kind of this wedge on the other. Well, this ice axe has the wedge on one side and just this ice pick on the other. It's just fucking scary looking. Basically, it's like a scarier axe to have sunken into your skull. Like, I would never want someone to sink any kind of axe into my skull, but if someone was like, hey man, we're going to have to smack you in the head with an axe, that's the bad news. But okay, that's the bad. The good news is that we're going to let you pick between, like a traditional lumberjack axe and an ice axe. And then they showed me both of them, and I'd be like, I don't think that the second part really qualifies as good news, but I am going to go with the lumberjack special. Stalin's reach and desire to silence all opposition found Trotsky in Mexico through Ramon Mercader, a Spanish communist who worked for Stalin's secret police, the NKVD. And Mercader served 20 years in a Mexican prison for killing Trotsky, and then received awards from Stalin, including the Hero of the Soviet Union upon his release. I'm sure that made 20 years in a Mexican prison just totally worth it. Sure, I spent 20 years in prison in a country known for notoriously bad prisons. The subhuman food and constant threat of rape and violence was terrible, but I did get this super cool medal and an official certificate signed by Stalin, so, overall, worth it. Bad news, permanently scarred, mangled, barely functional rectum. Good news, super cool medal. Like, really cool. So put it in your lunchbox, surely. So who are these Bolsheviks I keep talking about? Well, they were a political party formed primarily in exile, led by Lenin. They were born out of the Marxist Russian Social Democratic Labor Party in 1903. I guess they just they couldn't narrow that down to 2 or 3 words. Everybody had to get a say, and it ended up being like a fucking 19-word party. If you remember from the Rasputin suck, Russia was ruled by czars at the turn of the 20th century. There was also political parties forming initially underground and in secret, and then with the almost revolution of 1905, when the czar realized he was going to lose his throne if he didn't make some concessions, kind of get his shit together, that's when Nicholas II agreed to relinquish some of his autocratic power, and he gave the people of Russia a parliament with limited legislative power, the Duma. In reality, they had no legislative power. Not really. Not anything for any consequence. The Duma was a governing body composed of the members of various political parties, and then Nicholas would dissolve the Duma. He retained the power to do that, and then rebuild it at any given time. If there was a bunch of people there who didn't really care for him, he would just fucking shut it down and start in with some new people that he had like handpicked. And then prior to the revolution of 1917. That's kind of how he operated for a while there. So if you were a party that was against the czars, you had no real power, and you were liable to be kicked out at any time if the czar or his cronies, thought you were a rabble-rouser. And you were also liable to disappear via exile or execution, which is why Lenin, chose to grow his revolution abroad. And then we have Stalinism, another form of communism created by Stalin. Now, Stalinism is defined as the theory and practice of communism developed by Stalin from Marxism-Leninism, marked by rigid authoritarianism, widespread use of terror, and an emphasis on Russian nationalism. Basically, it's the most fun, lighthearted version of communism you can find. It's so much fun. It's communism with a party hat on. No, it was a fucking nightmare. It included rapid industrialization, collectivization of agriculture, the subordination of the interests of foreign communist parties to those of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, deemed by Stalinism to be the leading vanguard party of the communist revolution at the time. In other words, much more rigid, controlled, and focused on industrialization than the other forms of communism. Also a cult of personality similar to North Korea's communism. Russians were never taught that Stalin was a god, like North Koreans are taught that Kim Jong-un is a god, but they were taught to believe that he was like this father figure, and he was godlike in his love and devotion to the people of Russia. And it empowered other nations such as Cuba and North Korea to become communist. Communist satellite nations ultimately subservient to and dependent on Mother Russia. Okay, so one more term before we really get into Stalin's rise to power, Chikatiloism. Chikatiloism. Sorry, it's a tricky word. Chikatiloism is a belief held by many timesuckers that it is somehow very funny for an impotent late 20th century Ukrainian child rapist and murderer and topic of Timesuck 57 to make random cameos in historical lessons that have absolutely fucking nothing whatsoever to do with his life or his story. Chikatiloists seem to enjoy a silly Russian accent. What is big deal? What is big deal? Constant references to a shamecock. A limp cock of shame is bane of existence. And also, strange, how you say, claim of fame for Chikatilo. And a never-ending desire to wrestle children, and masturbate in public, including orgasming in his pants, as if that should somehow be socially acceptable. What is big deal? I wrestle kids to teach physical fitness and make strong for Russia, and sometimes come in sweatpants. How that's big deal? How bad for anyone if Chikatilo tug on the limp shamecock inside pants, like a mother bird that tug on the worm from morning yard ground? I see no humor in tugging and wrestling. So, those are some important terms, to know when we're talking about Russia. So basically, to understand where Stalin and Stalinistic communism comes from, you just need to understand that for a long, long time, Russia was a feudal monarchy ran by the czars, and the czars and the minor nobility around them were the haves. And the overwhelming majority of Russians were the have-nots. There was the royalty, a very small wealthy class, largely comprised of some type of noble that the monarchy relied on to manage the peasants. And then there were the peasants themselves, mainly comprised of farmers who for the most part lived poor, shitty lives. And that's why Marx's notions of the poor rising up and overthrowing their masters was appealing to the average Russian. That's how the revolution got going. They were tired of being exploited by the crown. Nicholas II was a poor ruler. He was running the monarchy into the ground in the early 20th century. Russia's gotten slapped around in a few wars like World War I and the Russo-Japanese War. So national morale was low. There was a food shortage, several of them. There was widespread economic disasters. Russia was just this fucking feudal-like backwoods farming society. And meanwhile, the rest of Europe is quickly industrializing. Russians were the pioneers of Europe, if you caught last week's episode. Well, looky here now. I got some pig. Taste this pig. I ever did lick out of a woman's beard. And communist ideals became very appealing. Russians had long been ruled by the czars having strong ties with the Russian Orthodox Church, and this combo of God and crown just wasn't working for the average Russian. And then within the Marxist revolutionaries, they just had different ideas of how Russia should transition into communism. And eventually, Stalin's ideas won out and shaped the Soviet Union. He enforced his ideals with an iron fist and a lot of death, so much death. So let's get into it. Let's get into the life of Stalin with the Timesuck timeline.
Strap on those boots, soldier. We're marching down a Timesuck timeline.
Joseph Visanovich Jugosvili was born December 1878. He was born in 1978, guys. He's very recent history. He was born December 1878 in the struggling village of Gori, Georgia, to an impoverished, dysfunctional, uneducated family. Stalin was the third child born to Bessarion and Ekaterina, called Kiki Jugosvili. The previous two had died within months of being born, which is actually very common in this part of the world. The previous two babies had actually killed themselves, which obviously not normal for most parts of the world. However, infant suicides were super common in Russia and in Georgia and those kind of surrounding Eastern European nations. The Soviet Union would actually go on to have the highest suicide rate amongst infants the world had ever seen, only recently being surpassed by North Korean babies. A lot of babies in these areas, of what would later be the Soviet Union, just kind of instinctively realized in the first few months of life how shitty and terrible and hopeless life was, how much worse it was going to be, and the moment they learned to roll over, they would just roll themselves out of their cribs or, cots or, fucking cardboard type, cement boxes or whatever, and kind of just smash their heads onto the cold Russian floors of their concrete sheds. And of course, that's not true. Babies do not kill themselves. Stalin's childhood nickname was So-So, which I'm sure was just a cute, meaningless nickname in Georgian, or like Russian culture. But what I was thinking, what a cruel nickname that would be to give an American child today. Just what's up, So-So? What's up, average sauce? What's up, nothing special? Why do you look all down and out? Does it have anything to do with your family continually referring to you as nothing to write home about? Oh, lighten up, no big deal. His father, Bazarian, was a relatively successful shoemaker during Stalin's early life, but unable to keep up with changing fashion and likely suffering from depression due to the loss of his first two children, Bazarian sank into alcoholism and just became a kind of, a drunken mess of a human being. Poverty ensued. The family was forced to move from one dump to another. Stalin's father became abusive, and his mother, a devout Christian, took refuge in a local priest's home where young Georgian Stalin would learn the Russian language. In 1884, Stalin contracted smallpox and was left with lifelong facial scars. His family immediately changes his nickname from So-So to Fugly, which I'm guessing means something nice in Russian. Probably doesn't mean fucking ugly, I don't think. Of course, that's not true. In 1888, Kiki's hard work pays off. She's able to send her son Joseph to school, the first in his family to attend. She deeply desires that he become a Russian Orthodox priest. So at age 10, Stalin goes to the Gory Church School, which was normally reserved for children of the clergy. Kiki was either shrewd or honest in claiming that Stalin's real father was a deacon to get him in there, and that Bazarian was not his biological father. Scandalous. Whether she was telling the truth or not, it worked, and he got in. Stalin clung to and encouraged his story later in life, although the general consensus amongst historians is that Bazarian was likely his real father. Stalin was said to be one of the best students, but also the naughtiest student in class. Naughty Stalin. Naughty So-So. Bad future dictator. He was excitable, active, prone to mischief. He formed and led a rough gang of children that often fought other kids. It was known for its cruelty and his downtime from thug life. He was also a choir boy. The old choir boy by day, thug also by day routine. Classic So-So. In 1891, at 12 years old, Stalin is injured when he is hit by a horse-drawn carriage. His left arm is left permanently disfigured and disabled. His arm had to be reconstructed by an extensive surgery, leaving it permanently shorter than his right and stiffened at the elbow. Man, extensive surgeries in 1891 had to have been a motherfucker, right? Painkillers and surgery techniques not nearly as evolved as they are now. During the same year as this injury, Stalin's father takes him from his mother's home to Tiflis, the capital of Georgia. Bazarian takes his son to work at a local shoe factory, and so he can learn to be like a cobbler's apprentice. And this was one of Stalin's first few work experiences in a capitalist society, and it was harsh and unrewarding, and he hated it. Yep, a little bit of hard work and he's out. If only he could have been a jeweler's apprentice or a well-paid banking assistant, maybe things would have gone differently for Russia. With the help of teachers and priests, Stalin is returned to his mother, which officially ends Kiki's marriage with Bazarian, who then stops all financial support. In February of 1892, Stalin's class is taken on a field trip of sorts to watch a public hanging of several peasant bandits. The viewing did not have the desired effect of being a crime deterrent on Stalin. Instead, it pulled sympathy from him for the plight of the poor. This even had a lasting impact on him, may have been the primary catalyst towards his role in history as a communist revolutionary. Man, late 19th century Georgia's field trips, no joke, huh? Okay, children, change of plan for field trip. We no longer go to zoo and look at penguins and polar bear. Instead, we go to town square to watch mass hanging of dirty traitor thieves. So no more visit to monkey exhibit. Instead, we watch a flicker of life extinguish from eyes of starving poor people. Caught stealing food to provide for dying babies. Please, no crying for thieves. Any child caught crying shall be beaten harshly for showing sympathy for enemy of state. Now, line up for a horse-drawn carriage bus thingy and smile for class picture. Smile, it's fun field trip day. All right, let's take a quick break from communistic misery and talk about today's first sponsor. Today's Timesuck is brought to you by Audible. Audiobooks are great for helping you be a better you, whether you want to feel healthier, get motivated, or learn something new. And with an unmatched selection of audiobooks, original audio shows, news, comedy, and more, Audible has all the audio content you need to start your year on the right foot. And right now, Audible has the hottest, most controversial book on sale today, Fire and Fury by award-winning author and journalist Michael Wolff. Michael is a columnist for USA Today, The Guardian, Vanity Fair, and more. Fire and Fury tells the inside story of the first 9 months of Trump in the White House. What does Trump's staff think of the most controversial president of our time? Why was FBI Director James Comey really fired? What was Trump's relationship with lightning rod Steve Bannon, and so much more? Is it the real inside scoop? Is it sensationalism? Up to you to decide. It's an exciting he said, fascinating listen. This book just came out and Audible already has the audio book. So try books like Fire and Fury on Audible today, whether it's on your phone, through your car, from a tablet, or at home on an Amazon Echo. You can get through tons of books while doing almost anything. And Audible now even lets you switch seamlessly between devices, picking up exactly where you left off. So start a 30-day trial and your first audiobook is free. Go to audible.com/Timesuck or text Timesuck to 500 500. That's audible.com/Timesuck or text Timesuck to 500 for a 30-day trial and your first audio book. You can do it with audiobooks. Links available to all of this at timesuckpodcast.com and on the Timesuck app in the episode description. Back to Stalin. July of 1893, Stalin is recommended to seminary school in Tiflis. Georgians are a minority in Tiflis, and his native tongue is prohibited. Stalin is proud of his heritage, however, and publishes some poetry in Georgian under a pseudonym, and he performs well academically for some time. Stalin went on to learn about Darwin's theory of evolution there, which was an affront to Russian orthodoxy. He also developed questions regarding the problem of evil, which focuses on the idea that evil cannot exist with an omnipotent, omnipresent God. Among other things, this led Stalin to become an atheist, which meant the end of Kiki's plans for her son to become a priest, despite her years of labor and laundry and gathering money from family and friends to make that happen and hope that he joined the clergy. Man, if you guys think I've been hard on religion, I got nothing on Stalin. Communists would go on to ban religion entirely in the Soviet Union, just, kick the Russian Orthodox Church and all other churches just right in their church dicks, just kick them completely out of Russia. As annoyed as I can be with certain fundamentalist branches of religion, banning them is never the answer. When we look into history and examine all the atrocities committed under the name of Christianity, for example, that doesn't lead me to believe, and I hope I haven't come across this way, it doesn't lead me to believe that Christianity in and of itself is evil, or that it's the reason for killings. Take away Christianity or Islam or any other religion, in my opinion, and I think various bad people just find new justification for their hatred, judgment, and murder. Right? Religion isn't the problem. Human nature is the problem. In my mind, it's similar to my gut feel on the gun debate. Get rid of guns, and I do truly believe people will just find another way to kill each other. To me, guns aren't the real problem. People wanting to kill each other are the real problem. That being said, I do think certain guns make mass murder way too easy, and I don't think all guns should be legal. Extreme example, you shouldn't be able to bring a fucking Gatling gun into a mall and just hand crank that bad boy around and light up the food court. I don't know. But back to Stalin. Gun control, or the lack thereof, entirely different, very complicated, and trigger-inducing suck. No pun intended, by the way. I just thought of that. Stalin became increasingly difficult at school. His grades dropped. He was often in trouble and showed a disregard for the norms of the school. Grew his hair long. Joined a secret banned book club. Started listening to a lot of Lynyrd Skynyrd. A lot of Led Zeppelin, fucking just, a lot of pot, started, just dropping a lot of acid. No, wait, I got my arrows wrong. No, but he did grow his hair out, joined a secret band book club, disruptive in class, read a lot of Pootie and Juju, just too little, too diddle, Pootie. In his banned book club, he and others read history, philosophy, pro-revolution works, other liberal works, banned books. Can we never do that in this country again, by the way? The U.S. does have its own history of banning books. So ridiculous, such an affront to personal liberty and freedom. So arrogant of a government to think it should determine what's safe for its citizens to read. Pro-censorship people, by the way, some of my least favorite people ever. Right? Like, Tipper Gore, when she was trying to fucking, censor Two Live Crew and all that stuff. Just get the fuck out. I'm never the love it or leave it guy, or if you don't like it, you can get the fuck out of this country. But if you don't like free speech, just fucking get out. That's where I will become that guy. Just get the fuck out of this country. You dangerously ignorant, simple-minded piece of shit. Go to some other place where they fucking censor you. Live that life. Stalin also read Capital by Karl Marx, which was convenient timing, given the socialist movements were on the rise in Georgia. Stalin began seeking out others with Marxist ideals and socialist groups, but found most to be too moderate. Eventually encountered some written work by Lenin, who was writing under the pseudonym of Tulin. Stalin dropped out of seminary school just a few months shy of graduation and joined the revolution. I don't like the revolution Stalin joined, but how cool would it be to join a revolution? I mean, seriously, how exciting is that shit? Can you imagine just walking away from school or walking away from your job, just walking away from all your normal mundane responsibilities of making sure your tax forms are filled out right and, and making sure this fucking I's are dotted and the T's are crossed and these documents and making sure you get milk at the store that night and, all these fucking making sure your cable bill is paid. All that goes away and you're just, you just fucking arm up and you just part of an underground revolution to overthrow a government. Getting killed or imprisoned for doing that, bummer. That part would be a bummer. But other than that, sounds super cool. So in 1899, Stalin joins the revolution underground community and goes by the code name of Koba from a book called The Patricide. In the fall of 1899, Stalin begins working at a meteorological observatory, but then is arrested in early 1900 because of his father's debts. Apparently his father had failed to pay some personal debt. And this is a dad he doesn't really have much contact with anyway. And it was the son's responsibility to ensure that these debts were taken care of under the laws of the land. How much does that suck? Man, if that policy was around today, I would be in jail right now. Zing! That was a little joke against my dad. That was a joke for one. Hope you liked that, my sister Donna. I'm guessing you did. This may have been technically legal at the time to do for Stalin, but it was most likely a veiled threat. A warning for Stalin to get his act together and quit fraternizing with Marxist groups. Kiki hears of her son's imprisonment and quickly goes to Tiflis with money she'd borrowed from her wealthier friends to pay the tax debt. By May of 1900, the charismatic Stalin had gathered a bit of a following. He spread his Marxist knowledge through through secret meetings. His first major speech was delivered to roughly 500 workers at a secret location outside the city. He called for workers to strike and indeed inspired many to do so, despite this being a dangerous thing to do and contrary to what Marxists were doing at the time. Most were staying much further underground. On the night of March 21st, 1901, Stalin narrowly misses a roundup of local rebels by the Tsar's secret police. He is on his way to work at the observatory. When he catches wind of what is happening, he stays on the tram, rides it past the observatory, never returning to that job. Then he just kind of proceeds to live off donations from sympathizers and the charity of friends in the subsequent months. Things heat up further for Stalin after he helps plan a large demonstration for May Day in 1901. 3,000 protesters show up and several are wounded and 50 are arrested by Cossack police. Stalin escapes capture again. Stalin attends a meeting for the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party and is elected to one of 8 positions. And then in November, Stalin commits what is likely his first murder. The Russian Social Democratic Labor Party sent him to Batumi, a port city, and he uncovered one of the Tsar's secret police officers who was trying to infiltrate Marxist circles and, according to legend, has him killed. Not sure if he pulled the trigger or if someone else did it on his behalf. Local group members are divided by Stalin. Some support him in his tactics, his violence, while others fear that he is discrediting them and discrediting their cause. Stalin found a job at a local warehouse, an oil refinery owned by one of the Rothschilds, actually, the Illuminati. One night, while at work, the building caught on fire and workers rushed to extinguish the flames and save the building. Stalin had organized workers to demand compensation for doing so. Rothschild refused initially, and Stalin organized a strike. Well, on February 17th, the workers' demands were met, and an additional raise was given. Everything's looking good. But then 6 days later, the company fires nearly 40 workers, and so Stalin responds with another strike. Many of the lead strikers are arrested. Stalin organizes a protest outside the prison, and they attempt to storm the prison, storm the building. Cossack officers arrive, kill 13 protesters, and wound over 50 more. This hits national news, and Stalin is wanted now more than ever. On the day of the funeral, Stalin hosts another demonstration that brings 7,000 participants together. On April 5th, 1902, he is arrested and then sent to a Batumi prison, where he continues to spread his revolutionary propaganda and Marxist ideals. In 1903, he shipped off to Siberia for his continued troublemaking. The old Siberian exile. Nothing calms a man down like a few years in Siberia. How sad for the people who actually choose to live in Siberia. Like how sad that your homeland just has a widely known reputation for being just kind of one of the worst shitholes on earth. Right? Like a place that never comes up on a list of popular travel destinations. Like you never hear like, oh, where'd you guys go on your honeymoon? Siberia. Oh, cool. How was that? It was fucking terrible. We spent 2 weeks bundled up in a beat-up old shack, trying not to freeze to death, and eating nothing but broth made from an old boot. While in Siberia, the RSDLP splits between the Bolsheviks, Lenin, and the Mensheviks. Stalin attempts to escape on 2 separate occasions to join them. The first time, he is forced to return due to frostbite he endures thanks to the extreme conditions of Siberia. Fucking damn you, Siberia, you freezing heartless monster. The second time, he's successful and is able to make it back to Tiflis. While the Russo-Japanese War begins, Stalin encourages that they organize their own Georgian Marxist group, which draws anger from many other members. In the end, Stalin joins the Bolshevik movement, who is the main minority group in that, kind of in the politics of that area. Stalin continues to rally his cause by regularly debating with the Menshevik Party and calling for more hard-edge movements, less compromise with the middle class. He was always fucking hardcore about his ideals. Things swing Stalin's and the Bolsheviks' way in 1905. On Bloody Sunday, a group of unarmed protesters who are marching towards the Winter Palace of the Tsar to deliver a petition to Tsar Nicholas II, a petition signed by more than 150,000 people asking for better working conditions, are fired upon by Imperial Guards. The official count of dead by the government lands at over 90, while the revolutionaries claim more than 4,000 deaths. Numbers are a little off. I love that. I'm guessing it's probably closer to 4,000, but I love that the government's like, we fucked up. We definitely pulled the trigger. So sorry. I think in the end we killed 5 or 6 people. Actually, it was 15,000. Oh, we forgot. Oh, you know what? I forgot to carry everything. I forgot to carry all the numbers. The nation is outraged. Civil unrest breaks out with ethnic factions battling in class system struggling. Stalin, among others, organizes militia-style groups to keep the peace with locals, raids government supplies and weapons, launches attacks on the government's Cossack police. Cossacks retaliate, killing 60 student demonstrators. And Stalin responds with a bombardment of more organized attacks. So now it's like a real revolution. November 26, 1905, Stalin is elected to one of 3 Georgian Bolshevik delegate positions. When Nicholas II forms that parliamentary Duma as a way to keep his people from further revolting, allows people to participate, or at least feel like they're participating in the Russian government, maybe they'll calm down. This tactic would buy the Tsar, about another decade to rule, and then shit would be over. Stalin meets Lenin for the first time this year. He respects Lenin, but has his own ideas regarding communism that we talked about earlier. Lenin recognizes Stalin's potential, encourages him to stay active in the revolution. Well, then Stalin proceeds to support the cause any way he can, man. He's robbing trains to provide funds for the Bolsheviks. Upon returning to Tiflis, he discovers that the local rebels have been subdued and instantly helps organize the assassination of the military general behind subduing them. He then organizes a small group of 10 trusted members of the Tiflis group, leads them through a variety of criminal and violent movements, including bank robbery, movements that aid the Bolsheviks and help pay for Stalin's distribution of propaganda. He was fucking gangster. He was willing to die for his cause. In April of 1906, Stalin attends another Russian Social Democratic Labor Party conference led by the Menshevik majority. There's a lot of disagreement on how agrarian land should be handled and whether or not funds gained by robbery should be allocated. Lenin and Stalin believe they should allow such funds to be dispersed. Not allocated earlier, just allowed. Like the Mensheviks were like, I don't know if we should accept stolen money. And Stalin was like, well, you're going to fucking take it. We need it. In July of 1906, Stalin marries Kato Svanitsy, an educated, independent woman down with his communist yearnings. A woman who also softened Stalin, and he was madly in love with her. She was religious, and the hardcore atheist Stalin even agreed to marry her in a church. In September, Stalin attends another conference in Tiflis. Only 6 of 42 delegates are Bolshevik. The remaining are Menshevik. Stalin openly despises them. On September 20th, Stalin organizes his group of 10 and they rob a steamship. His new wife, Kato, is arrested for ties to his revolutionary activities, and soon after her release, on March 18, 1907, she gives birth to Stalin's first child, a son, Yakov. Now, you might know him as Yakov Smirnov Sr., father of popular 80s comedians Yakov Smirnov, who's one of Stalin's grandkids. America, what's a country? No. Yakov has no ties to Stalin. Pretty sure Stalin would have had Yakov Smirnov killed rather than listen to one of his terribly corny comedy shows. Sorry, by the way, if you are in love with Yakov. He's probably a super nice guy. Very sorry if you are Yakov. Really not my style. Just to each their own, I guess. June 26, 1907, Stalin's group organizes and has their biggest heist, steals 250,000 rubles, or rubles, excuse me. I guess that was the Georgian monetary unit, or 341,000 rubles, equivalent to around $3.86 million in 2017, now 2018 money being transported to the Imperial Bank. That's a lot. No one knows whether Stalin took part in the actual execution of the attack and the heist in which his team lobbed grenades at the bank stagecoach and its mounted escort from the tops of nearby buildings, opened fire on guards, killed up to 40 guards and some civilians, as well as a number of horses, according to contemporary reports. So, 40 plus people die, but none are from his group. So, win for Stalin. Man, that's like, I don't know if you remember that old movie, Heat, with, it was, it was Doc Holliday from Val Kilmer. There we go. It was one of my favorite Val Kilmer movies with like big shootouts and stuff, these bank robbers. It's like, man, he was doing that in real life. Okay, so Menshevik party members, they're angry about the big, robbery, confront him about the attack, but he denies it all. And then Stalin has to grieve a death that affects him greatly. His new bride, Cato, contracts typhus, dies on November 22nd, 1907, and he is beside himself. So much so that friends worry he will commit suicide and watch him closely. He loses composure, throws himself on Cato's coffin before he sees the secret police approaching his wife's funeral and escapes. Unable to give his son a normal life due to the whole wanted by the government situation he's in, he leaves his son in the care of Cato's family. There's a well-known quote about the event. Nobody could believe So-So was so wounded. The funeral was held at the church where they had married. Stalin, pale and tearful, spoke to Joseph Iramishvili, another childhood friend. This creature, he said, gesturing at the open coffin, softened my heart of stone. She died, and with her died my last warm feelings for humanity. Stalin holds nothing back at this point and works with his group/gang to commit multiple robberies, hold children of wealthy families for ransom, create counterfeit money, and kill anyone who gets in their way. On March 25th, 1908, Stalin is arrested again and sent to Siberia for exile. Between 1902 and 1913, Stalin was arrested 7 times and exiled 6 times. And while I found all kinds of articles and books that reference him being arrested, the best answer I could find regarding why he was arrested just said revolutionary activities. He was never actually arrested for any robberies or violence as far as anything I could find. And if he had been, he probably would have been hanged rather than exiled to Siberia. He's lucky that the czars and the government of Georgia were softer on protesters than he would later be, because if Stalin had been caught helping organize labor strikes and similar activities by, say, I don't know, Stalin's government, he would have for sure been executed. In Siberia, Stalin leads fellow exiled Bolsheviks and assassinates anyone suspected of being a spy. In June, he escapes from a Siberian labor camp to a nearby village disguised as a woman, makes his way from there to St. Petersburg. In 1909, he was arrested again, but bribed his way out of it, and then was arrested again on March 23rd, 1910, with his girlfriend at the time, sent back to Siberia, banned from entering the Southern Caucasus for 5 years. Again, what a strange punishment. I guess it's cheaper than prison. What if we did that? What if we just made everything like north and west of, say, Fairbanks, Alaska, just a modern day, just kind of new Siberia? And we just took criminals and just put them on a train that just ended 40 miles northwest of Fairbanks, and then just kicked them all out. Just built a wall that separated New Siberia from the rest of the state. Just, figure it out. Best of luck, everybody. Set up a few labor camps. And even after prisoners finish their time, they have to stay there, live in their little prisoner-built New Siberian villages and stuff. Such an insane thought to me that really happened. Because some people were exiled to Siberian labor camps for crimes. Other people just had to fucking live there. Maybe they were part of some ethnic group that the people in power didn't care for at the moment. Like, get to Siberia, get over there. And then they couldn't come back to the rest of Russia, but they also couldn't necessarily enter a new country and just take up citizenship. They just lived in this sort of strange Russian purgatory. Why can't we return to Russia? Because, well, to tell truth, we don't like you very much. You look weird, you smell funny, head is too small for liking. Well, can we just go to Poland or Austria or someplace? No, we want you to live, we do not want you to leave whole country. We like having some people in Siberia, make country look bigger on map, more powerful. But it's terrible here. It's very hard to survive here. I know. That's why you're there. That's why I already said we don't like you. No more talk, or, I kill you, I kill whole family. So go back to playing with rocks, or the eating of soup made of muddy ice, and stew made of poop and tears, or whatever sad people do in sad, horrible place. So Stalin plans to marry his girlfriend out in Siberia in a prison church, but he's transferred before the ceremony, never sees her again. He's having some tough romance right around this time. He then goes on to have a son with his landlady, Maria Kuzakoya. While exiled, Stalin left prior to Constantine being born. In later life, Constantine was forced to sign a document forbidding him to ever announce who his father was. For the remainder of 1911, Stalin was basically just arrested repeatedly, exiled, and then just slept around reading books while waiting out his time. 1912, Stalin is appointed editor of the Pravda Communist Party newspaper. Stalin also spent a great deal of time trying to answer the question of how to incorporate various ethnic minorities of the region. Lenin believed he was the man to answer that problem, perhaps because of Stalin's own experiences as a minority, with being a Georgian, as well as a man who could quickly be called upon to get any job done regardless of whatever laws happened to be in place. In March of 1913, Stalin publishes the article Marxism and the National Question in an attempt to gain more support for the Bolsheviks. Lenin's very happy with it, and Stalin publishes under the pseudonym of K. Stalin. These guys always publish under pseudonyms, again, just to avoid arrest. And Joseph picks Stalin, an alias that would stick, because Stalin is loosely translated in kind of old Georgian as Steel or Man of Steel. What a badass last name, man. The Man of Steel. It's fucking Superman. Who knew that the real Superman was a totalitarian Soviet asshole? Shortly after publishing his article, Stalin was arrested again at a masquerade ball, exiled to Siberia. Hoping to avoid another escape, he was placed in a village on the edge of the Arctic Circle, Quirikia. Not sure why they just didn't kill the guy. Why, like, he just keeps fucking up. Why don't they just kill him? They just keep throwing him back to Siberia, and he just keeps coming back. Why give him so many chances? I don't understand. But while in this village, he has an affair. This is creepy, super creepy. He has an affair with a 13-year-old girl, Lydia Perovgia, who is 1 year under the age of consent. They have a child together, but the child doesn't survive. She becomes pregnant a second time, births a son named Alexander in April 1917 after Stalin leaves exile. Fucking gross. Stalin was 35 when he got together with this poor Siberian orphan. I don't know if I mentioned he was an orphan. I get that life may have been a little different in a small village in the Arctic fringes of Siberia, but shacking up with a 13-year-old? I get that kings used to take, child brides in Europe, not that far back before Stalin, but somehow that seems even less gross than what Stalin did. I don't know. Maybe it's all gross. Maybe creepy dudes just got away with being pedophiles back then. If someone went through puberty, I guess they were fair game. I do know Stalin almost got arrested for some sort of sex crime for shacking up with this girl, even for backwoods, Arctic Siberia. 13 was still too young. 14, being the cutoff. It's so weird because my son is 12. Kyler is 12. I'm 40. What Stalin did is comparable to me shacking up with one of Kyler's classmates, which is just abhorrent. It's so gross. I don't know why I'm fixating on this. The guy would go on to cause the death of millions. In the big scheme of things, getting a 13-year-old pregnant not once but twice, kind of low on the list of Stalin's worst deeds. I guess, I don't know, maybe it's just a communist way. Maybe that was a part of the revolution, getting to sex up young girls. Chikatilo, the butcher of Rostov, he was real into being a communist. And, he did take great pride in being a good communist, and he did love having sex with kids. Maybe he was just too communist. Maybe he was just too into it. What's his big deal? I'm no bad guy. I good, strong communist. I only choke out kids too weak and worthless to fight back. I weed out weak kid wrestlers to keep Mother Russia strong and healthy. If kid cannot handle limp cock of shame, how kid grow up and fight capitalist pigs? Russia, what a country! I don't know. October 1916, exiled Bolsheviks are conscripted to join the military effort in World War I. Stalin is deemed unfit for battle by a medical examiner in February of 1917 due to his crippled arm, which humiliates him. May have also saved his life. When Tsar Nicholas abdicates the throne and the February Revolution takes place, Stalin was still in exile and still alive. After exile, Stalin takes full control of the Pravda in 1917, again, that famous Russian propaganda paper. The Pravda would become the main propaganda vehicle for Stalin's Soviet Union. And let's talk about the future of Stalin's propaganda for a second. Having perfected his techniques while acting as editor of the Pravda, Stalin would become a master of propaganda, constantly worked to maintain his image and the image of a successful, bountiful country. Stalin had artists, poets, and the like depict him in statues, portraits, poems, and more. As a father-like figure over the country, he was omnipresent, a hero of the proletariat, a fierce protector with a stern, disciplining hand. He created a cult of personality. Sounds a bit like Kim Jong-un and his father and grandfather, right? Man, when a leader starts having statues of themselves built around the country, get real fucking nervous. All news was controlled and false images created to show that the glory of Russia, the bounty of harvest, grain was often put on top of props. that were used to fill empty containers and make it appear that the containers were just overflowing with grain when they were in fact nearly empty. History was rewritten. Stalin was depicted as a much more involved fighter during the revolution, a hero of the revolution, when in fact, he was exiled in Siberia for most of it. Trotsky was later slandered and eventually removed entirely from most historical texts. Capitalism was harshly criticized. Pictures were altered to remove people from situations in which Stalin didn't want them to be there. Cities and structures were named after Stalin. The state controlled all information and killed or imprisoned anyone who Stalin took issue with or publicly criticized him, or even possibly criticized him. The propaganda was so effective that the country went into deep mourning at his death. He controlled everything, their education, food, future, death, all of it. Now he was gone. There was immense fear of what would happen next without the father of Russia. Just rewrote his own history and convinced a giant nation that he was their great savior. Ended up killing almost everyone who knew the real story. What an odd reality to create. You know what? I want to try it. Let's do it. Okay, from here forward, here's my backstory. My new backstory is that I am the greatest two-sport athlete of all time. Sure, I dabbled in comedy, but only when I wasn't fucking crushing 80 to 100 home runs a year, every year, for whatever team won the World Series during the year I played with them. Because I won every year. I won the World Series every single year. I also threw for 2,500 touchdown passes over 15 seasons, and I caught another 700 touchdown passes. I caught over 100 touchdown passes that I fucking threw for whatever team won the Super Bowl that year. Let it be known from here forward. All right, back to the Bolshevik Revolution. Stalin works with Lenin to move the party forward despite often being at odds with what Lenin wants. Lenin is currently still helping the revolution from afar, still from his self-imposed exile in Europe. Stalin continued to work closely with Lenin, maintaining a good relationship despite differing opinions. Stalin took charge of Lenin's safety at times, and in turn, Lenin continued to advance Stalin's career. Lenin returned to Petrograd, formerly St. Petersburg, and on October 10th, secured a majority vote in favor of a coup. On October 24th, police raid the Bolshevik newspaper office. On October 25th, Stalin joins Lenin for a Central Committee meeting where they will direct the coup. Bolshevik militia overtakes the electric grid system. This is kind of badass. State banks, post office, multiple bridges, and telephone system. They just take control over everything. Bolsheviks take their ship, they have a ship, the Aurora, to the Winter Palace of the Tsar, where the provisional government is convening an open fire. The government almost immediately surrenders and is immediately arrested by the Bolsheviks. How fucking good was that day for Lenin, Stalin, and their cronies, man? They successfully took down a government. Can't even imagine what an adrenaline rush that would be. There was some vodka drank that night. And then all hell breaks loose. The Russian Civil War begins, lasts all the way through 1921 with the Red Army, the Bolsheviks, battling the White Army, anti-Bolsheviks. The White Army was basically comprised of everyone but the Bolsheviks. Included monarchists, capitalists, supporters of democratic socialism. Leon Trotsky is given control of the Red Army, proves to be an excellent commander under difficult times. He had an army of 3 million and had war efforts at times on 16 different fronts. With the victory of the Red Army, Stalin, Lenin, and Trotsky are now in control of the country, and Stalin publicly proclaims that no 13-year-old girl will be safe from his hard-as-steel communist cock. Okay, maybe he doesn't proclaim that, but he may have thought it based on what we know about him. But you know who never thinks things like that? Our next sponsor. Today's Timesuck is brought to you by Lisa, a company Stalin would have never allowed to exist because they make life far too comfortable for his rigid authoritarian tastes. Driven by the mission to provide a better place to sleep for everybody, Lisa is an innovative, direct-to-consumer online mattress brand that is also socially conscious. And that's not some Stalinist propaganda. That's truth. For every 10 mattresses Lisa sells, they donate one to a shelter through their 110 program. They plant one tree for every mattress sold and donate 1% of each employee's time to volunteer for local causes. They've exiled absolutely 0 people to Siberia ever. They're one of Forbes' top 20 startups to watch, and I love the quality sleep I get on my Lisa mattress each night that I am home. So does my dog Penny. Yeah, she seems even more rested than normal. Her and her little pampered life of leisure. She seems a little more rested after a quality night's, sleep on a Lisa mattress. So try a Lisa mattress in your own home for 100 nights risk-free. I can't recommend it enough. Available in the U.S., UK, Canada, Germany online with free shipping. This 100% American-made mattress ships compressed in a box right to your door. Or try it at the Lisa Dream Gallery in Soho, New York City, and Virginia Beach, and over 80 West Elm stores nationwide. And best part, get $100 off That's right, $100 off when you go to Lisa.com/Timesuck. All right, and now back to misery and Stalin. Trotsky was considered to be the better orator of the three, better liked, so he was, given opportunities to be the public face of the party that Stalin was not. Additionally, as the main military leader of the victorious side of the Civil War, he was clearly second in command to Lenin. Stalin had tons of enemies and was often kept more kind of behind the scenes, and he was outranked by Trotsky. He's a bit of a loose cannon. He and Trotsky struggled to find common ground over such things as whether or not the state should control trade unions. Trotsky favored state control. Stalin did not. Trotsky always disagreed with Lenin on various communist principles, which led to a rift between Lenin and Trotsky that would be Trotsky's downfall because Stalin was able to use this rift to his advantage and get closer to Lenin. He was a sneaky bastard. Trotsky was the obvious choice as successor to Lenin publicly in the early days of Lenin's regime, but Stalin was just too crafty, man. He'd been given, compared to Trotsky, a relatively low-level Communist Party position, but one that had a key feature to it, one that allowed him to appoint Communist Party members. And he used that to his advantage big time. He just started replacing Trotsky supporters amidst the ranks with, people who supported him, with his own allies. And he just did this for years. Just taking out the kind of foundation of the party out from underneath Trotsky. Smart dude. Between 1922 and 1924, Lenin sees what Stalin is up to and starts vocally showing more support for Trotsky, tries to slow Stalin's influence, and then Lenin dies in 1924. And Stalin, because of the support from the party he's been slowly rebuilding, and his image emerges as leader, having quietly outplayed Trotsky and isolated him. Lenin actually wrote out a manifest of sorts in preparation for his death. He had a stroke in 1918. While recovering from surgery to remove a bullet to his neck taken in an assassination attempt in 1918. And in his final testament, he made it clear that he wanted Trotsky, despite their differences, to succeed him as head of the Communist Party. But Stalin was able to intercept this document, make alliances with a few other high-ranking communists. He was able to keep Lenin's testament a secret until it was too late, until he'd already consolidated power within the party. And then he exiled or killed any and all who opposed his rule. Stalin continued to diminish Trotsky's role until he eventually exiled him, as we already know, and, Trotsky left for Mexico, where he'd meet his ice axe fate. 1928, Stalin initiates, now he's in charge, and he initiates what he called his first 5-year plan. And this would last from October 1st, 1928 to December 31st, 1932. And he has great ambitions for Mother Russia. He wants it to become an industrial superpower as fast as possible, and he demands an increase of 110% in coal production, 200% in iron, 335% in electric power, and a 600% increase in sexy-ass 13-year-olds. Sorry, I just can't stop thinking about his Siberian child lover. Just fucking predator. To accomplish these massive increases, he gives the Russian people some interesting incentive. He announces that workers' individual performance records will be posted publicly, and underperformers will be punished and humiliated. What a fun new policy. This fun new policy leads to a decline in attendance. Workers don't want to show up just to be embarrassed. This, in turn, leads to some strict, more rules. If workers are late, they're lazy, they're not meeting their quota, they could be accused of sabotaging the 5-year plan. So don't show up and you're a saboteur. And if found guilty, they could just be shot just on the spot, just fucking firing squad, whatever, just bullet to the head, or sent to slave labor camps, the gulags. The old get to the gulag gag. Such a fun joke to play on someone. Just, hey, comrade, how about you put in 4 more hours of work today? But I am so very hungry, and I am so tired already. Oh, maybe trip for whole family to Siberian gulag for 5 or 20 years. Be nice, refresh for you. Or a vacation of sort. Maybe you'll not be so tired and hungry after gulag. No, please. I work more. I eat less. Please. That is death sentence for family. I am so sorry. I just kidding. I just pull old gulag gag on you, comrade. Go home, Petrov. Eat. Rest. Really? Thank you, comrade. Of course. It's no big deal. Oh, thank you for mercy, comrade. I'm so tired and hungry. I go home now. That was trick. Why not you want sacrifice for Mother Russia? You sabotage 5-year plan. Now you go to gulag for real. Seriously. Whole family leave on train tomorrow morning or everyone killed by afternoon. Get out of here. So let's talk about these gulags. Gulag was the acronym for the Main Administration of Corrective Labor Camps. Apparently the acronym works better in Russian. Thanks to Article 58 of the Russian SFSR Penal Code, put in force on February 25th, 1927, anyone suspected of counter-revolutionary activities, essentially anyone deemed not loyal enough to the Soviet Union, could be arrested. So, this law basically just allowed anyone to be arrested just for anything. So that sounds fun. Article 58 was used to round up anyone not in good standing with the Communist Party, anyone not valuable enough to the Communist Party, and they could just ship them off to various gulags for slave labor. And then just to keep things interesting, a few actual scary criminals, a few violent offenders would also be sent to the gulags, just to kind of keep everybody else in check. Some form of the Gulag system had been in effect already since the early 1900s, but it grew dramatically under Stalin's reign. They were often located in harsh, isolated areas of the country on the fringes of civilization, and women, children, and men could all be in a Gulag. It wasn't just for grown dudes. Using Gulag labor, massive industrial undertakings were achieved because death tolls did not matter to Stalin. For example, the White Sea Canal was completed with slave labor from the gulags. It's a 141-mile-long canal connecting the White Sea to Lake Onega. Anywhere from 25,000 to 100,000 lives were lost in its construction, and it was built in 20 months. So bad news, 100,000 lives lost. Good news, project completed several weeks ahead of schedule. So pretty cool. At one point, there were 476 gulag camps spread throughout Stalin's Russia. And you can explore the history of gulags today if you're a particularly adventurous tourist. The Russian city of Vorkuta, the fourth largest city inside the Arctic city circle in the world at roughly 70,000 residents, far down from the well over 200,000 residents in the 80s before the areas of many coal mines were closed, began as a Stalin-era gulag. The Vorkutlag, established in 1932. It had an average temperature, this place, or it does, now, negative 20 degrees Celsius, negative 4 degrees Fahrenheit in February. In July, it gets up to about 13 degrees Celsius, 55 degrees Fahrenheit. So, it's a fucking terrible place to live. From 1931 to 1957, 2 million prisoners from the USSR and 21 other countries passed through the Gulag system in this place. Local historians say that there are more than 200,000 political prisoners buried in the permafrost in marked and unmarked graves. It once heaved with so many political prisoners from so many countries that this graveyard earned the nickname capital of the world. Ugh. And what was life like in these gulags? Terrible, in a word. Really, really, really terrible. Similar to life in a North Korean labor camp, There was a constant threat of rape, as reported by this camp rape witness, who said, an excited group of prisoners, I'm not going to try and do that in Russian, this is too much. An excited group of prisoners gathered around a bench next to the wall, recalled Janice Bardak. Those in the back row were jumping up, trying to see over the heads and shoulders of those in front, who were shouting obscenities and holding their penises. A young man lay on his stomach in the baths, and another man lay on top of him, embracing him around the chest and moving his hips back and forth. His back was tattooed with shackles, chains, and the popular Soviet slogan, "Work is an act of honor, courage, and heroism." On both sides were trumpeting angels. He breathed heavily while the young man underneath moaned and cried out. The spectators shouted. I caught sight of the young man's grimacing face. Jesus. Really sucked to be that guy that day. Just a crowd of other gulag prisoners watching some poor dude anally raped. Like it was a sport. Like it was like a boxing match or something. The more I learn about communist Russia, just the more I understand the creation of the monster of Chikatilo, What a big deal. The guy's just wrestling. Put on a good show for the crowd. Sounds fun. I see no tragedy. This normal Russian Wednesday afternoon is no big deal. I also found this description of a gang rape occurring on the way to the Gulag. This is even more disturbing. We were taken to the ship. We were marching 5 abreast, as always, in columns, 5 abreast surrounded by guards on all sides, guard dogs, German shepherds, all around guards with machine guns. They loaded us aboard, and the first thing that happened was the female criminals, the people from the criminal underworld, began to rob us of our own clothes. They made the women strip. The women resisted. They yelled. They batted. If it got so bad that if the criminals liked your underwear, they made you sleep naked, and tossed you some flea-infested rags in return. So this is from a female Gulag prisoner's experience. The prisoners in one of the men's holds found a pickaxe. They pierced a hole through the wall into the women's hold with a pickaxe. And then the criminals began filling the women's hold, and they gang raped the women. Fuck, my God. Pickaxing your way through a wall for a massive gang rape. right? These gulag prisoners are just reduced to being subhumans. Imagine this, poor female prisoner. You show up and then the other women, the toughest women, are fucking slapping you around, taking your clothes, just, forcing you just to sleep with, either rags or just naked in some cold, I'm sure, horrific, floor. And then you got the dudes literally just burrowing through the wall just to, be raped by a whole bunch of dude criminals. Fuck. There was a constant threat of starvation and physical violence as told by one former inmate, saying how much bread you got depended on how much timber you would cut the day before. So this is one, Siberian work camps. A tally that really could be the difference between life and death. Those who met 100% of their punishing targets, a physical impossibility for most men, earned 900 grams of bread, about 2 pounds, while those returning only 50% of their targets got only 300 grams of bread. So, that's significantly less than a pound. Made from rye, which had not been thoroughly cleaned. This black bread was the source of gulag life and carefully hoarded throughout the day. A little with the breakfast soup. Fucking breakfast. This breakfast soup sounds terrible. It's just a few bites during the short dinner break at midday. More with soup in the evening. So much fucking soup. It was just brothy, like fucking boot, tongue, radish soup, some horrible shit. A little bit in the morning, evening to stay off the inevitable pangs of hunger after 12 hours of cutting and stacking logs. If a prisoner stole clothes or tobacco and was discovered, he could expect a good beating from his fellow inmates. But the unwritten law of this camp was anyone caught stealing another man's bread earned a death sentence. An accident was not difficult to arrange in the forests. Ugh. And these stories are just what could happen to you at the hands of fellow prisoners. You could also be killed or raped by the guards at any time. And even if you weren't starving or being beaten or being raped, you were being literally worked to death in many camps. 12-plus hour days of breaking rock, to dig a canal or, cutting and stacking that wood, tunneling for a coal mine, just, et cetera. Just horrible backbreaking labor. All this for something as little as a neighbor ratting you out to secret police for seeming, kind of suspicious or for just not liking you. Fun times. So now let's talk about another form of hell on earth Stalin created, collective farming. Stalin seized all farms and factories, and he completely overhauled the Russian agrarian economy. Farmland is redistributed with no private ownership into collectivist farms. How much would that suck, by the way, if you're already a successful farmer? Man, the revolution did not work out in your favor, The government just takes your shit, redistributes it, fuck that, and actually, as I read too, also probably kills you for being some, smarty pants farmer. They didn't want you fucking telling their laborers how to do their work. The big landowners were usually just killed after the revolution by Stalin. I know it's not totally rational, and it's not like I have the military training to withstand a military takeover, but reading this does make me want to run out and buy so many more guns. Wolverines! Little Red Dawn reference, if you don't know. The goal of collective farming, besides putting even more power into the hands of a totalitarian regime, is that fewer people will be able to work together on larger sections of land and reap higher amounts of food, allowing more of the population to move into cities to work on infrastructure and in the newly built factories, just some communist efficiency. Be efficient or get to the gulag. This means that people were displaced from land they had worked on all their lives, that their family had worked on before them. This system also removed, power from the kulak landowners, the wealthier class. And, they were deemed hostile to the movement, unfortunately. They also knew how to farm and were no longer in charge of these farms. So that's, it doesn't make a lot of logical sense. Peasants were assigned plots of land to work collectively. And these are people with no prior farming experience a lot of times, were tasked with impossible quotas. Government officials came to collect and often took every ounce of food grown, leaving none for the farmers who actually harvested it. This collectivized farming experiment created that whole Ukrainian famine, the Holodomor that Chikatilo was raised in. Remember that? Just, his early childhood. Well, it was a big deal, so I starve off and on through childhood. It's built character. It's exciting sometimes to starve, but then barely live, only to starve again almost. Malnutrition may be why Chikatilo did not work right, but everyone have cross to bear. I love Russia. Only in Russia can starving predator like me keep getting job after job and keep attacking children. What a country! Yeah, it's just fucking insanity in communist Russia, especially rough in Ukraine in the early 1930s. In 1932 and 1933, Stalin cordoned off Ukraine to prevent escape because it was so shitty there. People were just trying to get the fuck out. He wanted to, prevent news from getting out to the rest of the country about how bad it was there, so no evidence could be collected or reported. Propaganda had been created showing bountiful bins and wagons, like we talked about earlier, full from the good harvest. And anything mentioned contrary to that resulted in harsh punishment, exile, execution. The famously fertile land had been destroyed in a failed attempt at collectivizing the farms. Government quotas, they were impossible to meet. State officials worsened local situations by demanding that not only grain grown be handed over to the state, but all foods grown. No food can now be grown for personal consumption or sale, so the people actually farming the land are starving. And again, we talked about that in the Chikatilo episode, just the fucking crazy irony there. Nearly all farmers, the original landowners, they've been imprisoned during the purges, leaving the land to peasants who didn't know what to do. The result was an estimated 5 million people dying from starvation across the Soviet Union, nearly 4 million in Ukraine. Ukrainians ate everything to survive during this time: shoe leather, farm animals, pets, rodents, frogs, leaves, grass, and when they could find nothing else, cannibalism ensued. A lot of this only recently is being recognized and discussed. It was a source of great shame for both the government and the survivors. However, silver lining, the number of workers in industry, construction, and transport does grow in that first 5-year period from 4.6 million to 12.6 million. So, yeah. Oh, man, what dedicated industrialist wouldn't take a little cannibalism for that kind of growth? Stalin, he was willing to sacrifice anyone for his industrial goals. Well, in 1931, at the first conference of workers, Stalin delivers an impassioned speech commanding workers to play a crucial role in industrialization. He says, "We are 50 or 100 years behind the advanced countries. We must make up this gap in 10 years. Either we do it or they will crush us." In 1932, Stalin's second wife, Nadia Alioui, a woman he'd married in 1919 when he was 39 and she was 16 because he's a creep, kills herself at the age of 31. Stalin had met Nadia when she was 10 to make it even creepier during one of his Siberian exiles. Man, he loved just finding kids when he was out in Siberia, didn't he? Her father had allowed Stalin to live with the family, and she killed herself because she was distraught over Stalin no longer being sexually attracted to her now that she looked like an adult. Despite her attempts at dressing up in pigtails and wearing a woman's version of a young kind of child's doll dress and constantly licking on a lollipop, which she, I guess, did daily the last several years of her life. No, she did not. She did not dress like that or lick lollipops, but the rest of it is true. He really did meet her when she was only 10, lived with her family in Siberia. I have no documentation to prove that he was attracted to her at that time or that he lost interest in her as she grew into her early 30s, but considering his history, yeah, maybe. He's a dirtbag. Creepy to marry a girl as soon as she's barely an adult. Even creepier when you met her when you were in your early 30s and she was 10. He really did seem like a pedophile of some sort. Clearly liked him young. And he was notoriously unfaithful to his partners. Dude was 5'4", wore platform shoes, and was self-conscious about his small size, and had a serious Napoleon complex. He had to prove how much of a man he was, had to bed many, many women. And he had a young girl complex, and, combining those two, God, who knows how many young teens he had sex with. But anyway, Nadia did kill herself, which, kind of uncommon for the leader of a nation's wife. She actually shot herself after confronting Stalin about the Ukrainian famine and about the purges that were going on that he had ordered and just receiving kind of contempt in return from him. So what purges, you ask? I referenced that earlier. Well, Stalin had begun exiling, sending to gulags, and outright executing anyone he deemed a threat for his vision to Russia, or to his vision for Russia, and his seat on the proverbial throne. Fellow communists he suspected of not being loyal enough, college professors who came across a little too liberal for his taste, basically anyone else who said anything that the world's greatest, communists didn't agree with, were liable to lose their lives and often did. And, and then his wife took her life. So here's how those purges worked. For the first trials of Stalin's Great Purge, Stalin would force public trials on people he brought kind of trumped up charges against, and people who, he was concerned about rebelling. Prior to trial, they'd be tortured. Their families would be threatened. They'd be interrogated until, quote-unquote, confessions were signed. And then their admission of guilt would be paraded, and the trials were, just pure propaganda, just for show. Stalin was saving the country from another war at the hands of treasonous rebels who wanted to destroy their beautiful nation, full of all this bountiful grain. After a few initial public trials, private trials then continue at length, where torture threats go on to get those confessions. Many of the criminals started as old prominent Bolsheviks that Stalin just needed out of the way. Stalin's secret police led the way for this under his very watchful eye and effectively just eliminated anyone who may have thought anything challenging or thought about challenging him. And all this happened in 2 short years from 1936 to 1938, the big parts of these purges. First, Stalin and his crew came after the old Bolsheviks, then the military officials, then government officials. They moved on to wealthy farmers, artists, intellectuals, foreigners, minorities, scientists, anyone that pissed Stalin off. Or pissed off a member of his secret police. In the end, he killed or imprisoned everyone in his country who could have, ironically, most helped him lead it to success. His extreme paranoia just deleted experts in academia, agriculture, military, crippling his own goals. The official number of purge victims stands at 1,548,366 detained person, of whom 681,692 were shot, an average of 1,000 executions a day. Various historians claim that the real number of victims could be twice that much. That's so much killing. So much killing. The first purge trial was in August 1936. 3 prominent Bolsheviks who helped in the October Revolution, right? Guys who helped get fucking Stalin into power. And 13 co-defendants were accused of joining Leon Trotsky and creating a terrorist organization to unseat Stalin. And Stalin pinned assassinations on him, which Stalin had probably likely been involved in himself, actually, and ordered them all to be executed upon finding them guilty. And they'd usually be executed like the same day. The second trial found 4 prominent members of the Soviet regime and 17 others charged with collaborating with Trotsky, committing various acts of sabotage while working for Japan and Germany. All were found guilty. 4 were given 10-year sentences, and the rest were executed. The third trial was in March of 1938. This one effectively claimed that they had missed some folks in the first trial. True prominent leaders from counter-Marxist groups in the 20s and in the 20s and 1921, including other prominent figures such as well-respected doctors. Other co-defendants were charged with conspiracy, assassination, and espionage. All but 3 were found guilty and sentenced to death. I guess they left the 3 out just to make it look like it was a fair trial. This one was hard for the world and public to swallow, as it was so clearly absurd and included charges against known loyal Marxists and prominent intellectuals. Additionally, one defendant during this trial did plead not guilty. Did it in court, changed his stance after having signed over his confession, The following day, he returns to court with a dislocated shoulder amongst other injuries and proceeds to plead guilty. So they just fucking beat him into changed his mind, and his young wife and infant son were threatened, and promises were then made to keep them safe if he played along. Well, despite those promises, after his execution, his wife was just immediately sent to the gulag. Man, that guy was a motherfucker. Stalin also had his 2 heads of the NKVD police, the first and then his successor, charged and executed. No one was safe, right? Even if you did exactly what Stalin told you to do, you could end up knowing too much and still be killed. The NKVD, the secret police, they were allowed to conduct their own trials that took place in the moment, on site, or behind closed doors, and you could be found charged, found guilty, and imprisoned, and then executed all within the same day. These troops were called the Troika, kulaks, or wealthier farmers who refused to work on collective farms or were otherwise resistant to the changes being made in the agrarian community. They were also imprisoned or killed, adding to the struggle to have productive farming, likely aiding the famine. And then there was those, academics. Roughly 2,000 academics and artists were also convicted, and 1,500 died in prisons and camps. Trotsky was the final prominent figure that had to go. Then that military purge, following the Great Purge, he enacted that military purge, a lot of closed-door trials that targeted top military officials. By the end, he effectively destroyed his own military. He killed or imprisoned all of his country's best leaders and fighters. In the end, 3 of 5 of his top marshals, top commanders, 13 of 15 Army commanders, 8 of 9 admirals, 50 of 57 Army Corps commanders, 154 of 186 division commanders, 16 of 16 Army commissars, and 25 of 28 Army Corps commissars were all removed and executed. That is insane for us. This concept of a purge, which is seemingly, like for Americans today, a far-fetched horror movie franchise, was reality for a lot of Russians back then. Rumors even circulated that Stalin imprisoned his own soldiers upon their return from war. He viewed them as failures, worried about the impact their international exposure may have on his ideals. Dude was cold-blooded even to his own soldiers, the very men fighting to keep his regime alive. When asked by German leaders if correspondence could be set up between their Russian captives, 5 to 6 million people in total, and their families, Stalin refused. And this is during World War II, saying, "There are no Soviet prisoners of war. The Soviet soldier fights on till death. If he chooses to become prisoner, he is automatically excluded from the Russian community." Fuck! Many millions died in German hands because they were already dead to Stalin, having allowed themselves to be captured. Again, I think of Chikatilo when I read this, man. If you recall, his father was one of those shameful soldiers who had allowed themselves to be captured by the Germans, and instead of returning home from war a hero, he returned home to be mocked by his community and to raise a child fathered by a German soldier who had raped his wife. Right? Chikatilo himself would be teased throughout his childhood for having a coward for a father. Think about how crazy that is. Think about how crazy a world is where Senator McCain, John McCain, would never have been allowed to run for any political office because he would have been a coward instead of a national hero for, surviving enemy internment. Stalin was so hardcore about making sure his soldiers fought to the death. He was such a heartless piece of shit. He passed Order Number 270, demanding that his military fight to death instead of surrender under penalty of severe consequence and threat to family. Soldiers, having been exposed to how others in Europe were living, began to reflect on their own dire situation in Russia, and the concept of surrender or defecting became very tempting. So he passes that Order Number 270 saying there are no Soviet prisoners of war, only traitors. Thousands are deprived of food and aid and die because a family member had been a traitor and allowed themselves to be captured. So, to keep them from just running away to another country, he makes it known that their families back home are going to suffer if they leave or become captured. And as terrible as all this was, though, under this oppressive new atmosphere of fear and death, his plan to industrialize Russia did work. Stalin's industrial goals did succeed at the cost of basically everything else. Cities were thrown together, structures were erected in great speed, output was always under quota, books were filled with forged numbers in an attempt to save lives, as anyone who underperformed would be punished and or sent to the gulags. But USSR did become a leading industrial nation. So, I guess for him, totally worth it. Now let's jump back to his 5-year plans. Okay, the second plan, 1933 to 1937, focuses on heavy industry. That's given top priority. Goals are eased as a reward for meeting goals in the first plan. Incentives are now part of the deal instead of just punishments. Women are encouraged to join the workforce. Childcare is now offered. The Soviet Union becomes one of the top steel-producing countries in the world under the second 5-year plan. Oh, and before things sound too good, the quality of life greatly diminishes for everyone as very little attention is paid to consumer goods. So they're making everything for like industry, like military and stuff, but they're not making actually things to live a fucking comfortable life. Live a comfortable life. The first 2 5-year plans increase the industrial capacity of the USSR dramatically in all major fields: steel, coal, electric power. Create new manufacturing sectors indispensable to any great power: automobiles, aviation, chemicals, plastics. Consequently, the first 2 5-year plans laid the foundation for the industrial might of the Soviet Union, especially in the military field. So despite all this evil, he does, through brute force, just forge the Soviet Union ahead into an industrial military power. Okay, so now the third plan, 1938 to 1941. The first 2 years of this plan are disappointing, and then after 3 years, World War II interrupts the plan. All right, on August 29th, 1939, Nazi and Russian forces signed a non-aggression pact that effectively meant both countries had agreed to stay out of each other's way and not attack each other. I did not know that before this. This was a massive public statement that caused a lot of stress for the rest of the world and was shocking given the historic animosity between the two countries. Maybe I did actually come across it. Anyway, additionally, they signed a secret pact to divvy Europe up between them. That's right, Hitler and Stalin were in cahoots. Stalin and Hitler were known actually to quietly appreciate each other's work and tactics. Stalin annexed parts of Poland, Romania, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and launched an attack on Finland. For a while, things went as planned, but then the Western Front began to bolster and prove more difficult than initially thought for the Germans. It didn't look as though Britain would fall. The Allies were gaining footholds in many locations. The Germans were also watching Russia's failure at their winter war, and they realized that their current partner may be an easier target than an asset. And they switched directions, and came after Russia, moving east, the easier target, instead of continuing west. Which also, for military historians, is probably a good reason why, the Nazis lost their war, is because they decided to fight a war on 2 fronts instead of just focusing their energy on one side. Anyway, June of 1941, Germans attack Russia, breaking the non-aggression pact. Stalin is stunned. He doesn't see this coming. His shock leads to a slow response that results in thousands and thousands and thousands of casualties. Stalin had ignored warnings from his own intelligence, the U.S. and Britain, and was completely unprepared for this. As Germans invaded Russia, heading to Moscow, Stalin employs the scorched earth method of burning and destroying his own country's goods so that the Germans can't have them. Man, dude was just fucking ruthless. Just did what it takes to get things done the way he wanted them to. Russia turns it around at the Battle of Stalingrad in August of 1942, lasts till February 1943. Stalin joins Allied initiatives to battle Germany, all while still planning on expanding Russian territory. World War II could not have been won by the Allies without Stalin's help, which was acknowledged by Churchill and Truman, although their distrust of Stalin continued and resulted in the Cold War. And despite World War II's interruption of his third five-year plan, despite heavy losses, Russia does continue to grow into a world power during this time. An overall rate of annual industry growth averaged 12 to 13% in the 40s, which is virtually unheard of. And that growth rate continued into the 50s. At quick glance, this seems to have been about double the growth rate of the U.S. that time, which was also doing very well. So, dude was a motherfucker, heartless bastard, but without him, Russia likely would not have become a world power. Who knows if Trotsky would have industrialized as effectively as Stalin did? Probably not. He just was not as ruthless, not as singularly focused. Okay, the fourth and fifth five-year plans, well, the fourth from 1946, 1950, the fifth, 1951 to 1955, focused on reconstruction after the war. Outside of Poland, the USSR was the hardest hit during World War II, and the nation was left in ruins. Casualties as many as 20 million, left many job vacancies. Animals, farms, buildings, factories gone or destroyed. The USSR could not agree to terms with the U.S. for a loan to aid reconstruction. Reparations are received from Germany and other European countries who pay Russia for having saved them, which does help with some funding. And then during his fifth five-year plan, the cruel dictator dies. He suffers a cerebral hemorrhage, and on March 1st, 1953, he suffers a hemorrhage, and then he's dead by March 5th, and the country mourns profusely. Of course they do. They have been brainwashed to love him. He lives to be 74, and there is speculation by some historians that he may have been poisoned due to suspicious autopsy results. We'll never know for certain. And that does take us out of this Timesuck timeline.
Good job, soldier. You made it back. Barely.
So Stalin's dead, and the Soviet Union he built on his ideals mourns for him. As openly as Russians mourn for him, I bet privately a lot of Russians celebrated. Just fuck you, Stalin. If you could have only died slow death before sending father and cousin to Gulag. Brother fighting war for you, and then labeled traitor, even though you never fight on front lines once in yourself in your life. I hope devil fuck you like you fucked Siberian child lover. Actually, they probably didn't think that because they probably believed all his bullshit. Stalin really was such a piece of shit, Just check out the story on his relationship with his firstborn son, Yakov. This is, if you didn't already think he was a monster, check this out. Yakov, Stalin's firstborn son, once tried to commit suicide but did not die. Stalin remarked that Yakov can't even shoot straight. Then Yakov goes to join the Red Army, and he's taken prisoner by German Nazis. So Stalin has Yakov's wife sent to the Gulag for 2 years, separating her from their 3-year-old daughter, his granddaughter, right? Because her husband was dumb enough to get captured. And then later, Nazis offer a trade for Yakov, one of their commanders, in exchange for, Stalin's son, and he refuses. Refuses to make a trade to save his own son's life. And then, after Stalin turns down the trade, Yakov is shot and killed. So, I don't think much of this guy. But I'm not the only one with opinions on Stalin. Let's check out what some other people think. Let's check out what the idiots of the internet think about Stalin.
Idiots of the internet.
Looking through the comments under a YouTube video titled Biography, Joseph Stalin Red Terror Documentary, posted by user History of Wars, you quickly see that a lot of people, especially people who seem to be Russians, admire Stalin for how he modernized the Soviet Union. And they also seem to believe that all the negative stuff written about him is just Western anti-Soviet propaganda. No, it's not. It is true. It is not just Western historical revisionism. Thank God for nonpartisan historians. The longer I do this podcast, the more I value historians, man. The keepers of the flame of truth. Sources you can find when you wade past propaganda bullshit artists, find out what really happened. If only more history was written by those people and not by regime puppets or sensationalists with clear axes to grind. Well, under the seemingly well-produced documentary, which does seem very truthful, user Alex Berger posts, Stalin was our father, our savior. He led us to victory. He liberated Europe. He made CCCP, Soviet Union, into a superpower. Okay, what's crazy is that technically Stalin did liberate Europe. Without him, the Allies, in all likelihood, could not have defeated Hitler. But he didn't do it for liberation reasons. He did it to save himself and to save the nation he'd built in his image. He did it for ego, not for love of country, not for love of his countrymen. And he did lead Russia into becoming a superpower, but only through casually sacrificing millions of his own people's lives, innocent people's lives, labeled his own soldiers cowards, sent military families to gulags. How far is it okay to take the concept of the ends justify the means? When does it stop being okay? If they always do, then I guess maybe Stalin was good for Russia. Maybe. But how can you honestly think this monster who put anyone who opposed him to death or into exile a savior? You're either misinformed, brainwashed, or you are an idiot. Another user takes Alex Berger's questionable praise into pure idiocy. User Robin posts, "I don't care if he killed 25 million people. I'm loyal to Stalin." What the fuck? I'd like to always write off comments like this as just people trolling, but I don't think that's accurate. I really don't. I think some people somehow truly don't care that, somebody like Stalin killed millions. And I'm guessing in part because those deaths have just become an emotionless number to them, right? You just hear a number, 20 million people, a long time ago, 25 million people, a long time ago, 60 million people, whatever. But imagine if you had to witness all those deaths firsthand. What if you watched those people die? What if you watched millions of families mourn those deaths? What if you saw families torn apart and murdered, all the tears and the wailing and grief, and all of that committed because of paranoia and evil ambition? Would you still just, be a big fan? Would you still be loyal? Would you still not care? If so, you're just as horrible as he was. You're just a fucking sociopath. So many comments along this theme. Some user with a name written in Russian, so I can't read it, posts, "The fake history is over. Archives have been recently looked in Russia, and it is concluded Stalin was a great leader. All the myth about millions killed by Stalin is no longer in use. Stalin was greatest leader ever in history. Stalin received USSR in poor conditions, but left country with best economy, social benefits, and science in the world." What? If that really is true, we need to stop trusting anything printed in English. Just accept that the world is flat. Drop out of whatever school you're attending. Just give up. Just give up believing anything anyone else tells you. Historians disagree on a lot of things. Stalin being a bad overall dude, not one of them. No actual credible historian thinks that Stalin was the greatest leader in the fucking history of ever, right? There's a lot of documentation regarding his atrocities, like a lot. And he didn't create the best economy. He created a system of terror where people lived in fear and poverty. According to a recent Forbes article, Russia currently still has a lower overall quality of life than China does. When you factor in the average citizen's purchasing power index, healthcare index, poverty price to income ratio, average traffic commute time, pollution levels, other factors, what's the point of being a superpower if the life of your average citizen is just wretched? And then idiot Frankie Hunter posts something that actually scares me. He posts under another Stalin video called "A Portrait of Stalin's Secret Police." What I don't like in the majority of the comments is the one-sidedness. The people who are living in the West only read and heard bad things about socialism in the Soviet Union. But if you know Russia and follow the Russian comments, they are 80 to 90% in favor of Stalin. And I would rather believe people who lived under Stalin and their children and grandchildren than the Western quote-unquote historians. No, Frankie Hunter, you dumb shit. Wrong. Why would you believe people who grew up under a known propaganda regime? Who grew up under the influence of massive, year after year, continual propaganda over outside historians. Never do that. This is why you should never just listen to only your nation's news, including this goes for Americans. When journalists are talking about, your nation, they might, be a little bit biased. Get a variety of perspectives. Listen to your own nation's news, but then also listen to the news of a couple other foreign nations. Find some perspective. Get some variety. And all perspectives concerning Stalin, even from Russian historians, are that he was a fucking monster. It's not like Russian historians no, he was great. He was the best man ever. No, he's horrible. A fair amount of people consider him to be a bigger monster than Hitler even was because he created more overall death and terror than Nazis did. Now, I'm not one of those people. I think he only was able to do that because his reign was longer. I think had Hitler been given another decade or so, he would have made even Stalin look not so bad in comparison. However, unlike Hitler, a lot of Russians still think, Stalin was a great leader. Most modern Germans seem to unanimously despise Hitler. Why? Why do one nation's youth hate their former dictator while another nation's youth seem to revere their dictator or former dictator? Well, according to the thoughts of one Russian historian I found, because Stalin won. This is an interesting thought that I wanted to share. Stalin won his war. He won World War II, and because he was a winner, his crimes get washed away. He becomes viewed as necessary for Russia to become a superpower. They needed a strong leader, and he just did what he did. Did what had to be done, and everything else is just lies and half truths spread by those who opposed him, lies spread by the people he defeated. How sick is that? To the victor go the spoils, and their crimes are forgotten and forgiven. But that is how history works, right? Right? An American of European descent, they're going to have a little different take on General Custer's historical value than a Sioux Nation American Indian. I'm guessing. A white American maybe going to feel a little bit differently about the legacy of Thomas Jefferson than an African American. It's interesting how we view our founders and military leaders, is it not? Well, while you can make a case for a lot of historical figures committing bad deeds that can somewhat kind of be chalked up to them being products of their time, Stalin does not get that pass. He was not a good dude by any standard, including the standard of a 20th century Bolshevik revolutionary. His peers did not consider him to be a good dude. He was a tyrant. He did accomplish a lot for Russia, but only through committing an unbelievable level of atrocity. And hopefully, someday, there will be less idiots of the internet who praise him.
Idiots of the internet.
Stalin's legacy really does make me think about other historical figures, man. How much good does it take to balance out such egregious sins? Does turning Russia into an industrial power justify the death of 20+ million Russians? Or some figures up to 60 million? What if, had Stalin not modernized Russia, backwoods Russia would still have been eventually sacked by the Nazis, and the Nazis would have won and butchered, hundreds of millions in the wake of World War II? What if they still ruled the world today? Does doing what he did to militarize, industrialize Russia, which did lead to his ability to keep Hitler from sacking Moscow and possibly win the war, it did give Allies the time and opportunity to invade Berlin. Does that justify his crimes? I don't think so. I don't think so, because it's not like he did what he did to stop Hitler. His motive was never altruistic, never remotely selfless. He did what he did because he wanted to just continue to lead, the most powerful nation, one of the most powerful nations in the world, at any cost. His actions were all about his desire for power, his unquenchable thirst for control. His ruthless ambition happened to lead to some good outcomes. He was a piece of shit whose own evil deeds did, kind of put him in a place where he was able to cancel out another evil dictator's horrible agenda, but that doesn't make him a good dude in any way, I don't think. To me, Stalin is no better than some gangbanger who happens to shoot another gangbanger in some drug deal gone bad before that gangbanger accidentally shoots an innocent child. Gangbanger number one did technically save a kid's life in that situation, but he's also sure as shit not a hero. So to me, that's Stalin. That's the gist. Now, let's take one more look back at Russia's Man of Steel with some top 5 takeaways.
Timesuck. Top 5 takeaways.
Number 1, by 1927, 10 years after the Bolshevik Revolution and 3 years after revolution leader Lenin's death, Stalin consolidated his stranglehold on the Soviet Union and turned a backwoods farming nation where 9 out of 10 Russians lived in rural farming villages into an industrial superpower able to help defeat Hitler in World War II. Number 2, under Stalin's reign, over 6 million citizens of the Soviet Union were deliberately killed by Stalin's regime, either executed outright or dying from anything but natural causes in gulags. Over 20 million deaths are attributed to having been the direct consequence of Stalin's actions, such as enforcing collectivized farming. Number 3, Stalin had a 13-year-old Siberian lover who he got pregnant twice. Gross. Number 4, if Leon Trotsky would have succeeded Lenin instead of Stalin, many, many less Russians would have died, as Trotsky was far less bloodthirsty. However, Trotsky did want to make the world one big communist state, so maybe Stalin saved America in a weird way from becoming a communist nation. So I guess maybe thanks Stalin for that. Number 5, new info. Let's look at a few Stalin quotes that reveal further insight into his deplorable character. Here's the first one. A single death is a tragedy. A million deaths is a statistic. Okay. Ideas are far more powerful than guns. We don't let our people have guns. Why should we let them have ideas? That's terrifying. And the final one, death is the solution to all problems. No man, no problem. Wow, that last quote is so exactly what I think sometimes. Son of a bitch, turns out I got a little Stalin in me. I do in moments of frustration think, no man, no problem. Dead. Maybe in light of hearing this, come from Stalin, that's not the best way for me to think. Oh, and his mustache supposedly influenced the mustaches of Hitler, Saddam Hussein, and other dictators. Yeah, he had a fashionable stash. Seriously, gotta have a strong stash game, I guess, to rule with an iron fist.
Timesuck Top 5 Takeaways.
So that's it. Stalin has been sucked. And now time for a few more announcements before this week's Timesucker updates. Houston and Dallas. Again, as I said last week, added to the tour. I'll be at the Secret Group Theater in Houston, Friday, April 13th. I'll be at the Texas Theater in Dallas, Saturday, April 14th. One show only in each of those places. More dates at the freshly built dancummins.tv. Yeah, thanks to Josh Krell for getting that going, getting it up. Fuck you to Warner Brothers Records for making it such a pain in the ass to redesign my own goddamn website. Again, check out Patreon, become a space lizard, ensure the survival of Timesuck. Let this experiment and curiosity continue to grow. I can't do it without you. And enjoy that new album on Pandora. And then enjoy the new album from the fucking Space Lizards. Right? You're going to get, maybe I'm the problem on Pandora, and then in a few weeks you're going to feel the heat when you become a Space Lizard. Link in the episode description for both signing up on Patreon and the Pandora album access. Thanks to Sydney Shives, Harmony Velicamp, Jesse Dobner, the entire Timesuck team. Thanks for all the reviews. Spreading the suck. Right around 2,500 reviews on iTunes right now. So that helps so much. It helps me get on other notable podcasts as a guest, so I can reach more future Timesuckers, get more space lizards. Big thanks to my little sister Donna Hale, for helping so much with the Stalin research. She is a fantastic teacher and a fantastic Russian researcher. And thanks to all of you who recommended Stalin for today's suck. Morgan Miller, Luke Perard, Crystal Laundry, Seth Quell, Dylan Newton, anyone else I forgot. Next bonus episode drops this Friday, January 26th, and the topic is going to be a surprise. What's that about? Well, you already know if you follow the show on Instagram at Timesuck Podcast, so follow and find out. And now for some Timesucker updates.
Updates? Get your Timesucker updates.
Okay, so I teased a big back and forth with super sucker Jessica Dowd last week, and that's what today's Timesuck updates is going to be about. Just this exchange. Jessica and I have been going back and forth in a very fun, respectful, and enlightening way, I gotta say, over the nature of Freemasons' fraternal organization and the the nature of organizations to be able to choose their members based on something like gender in general. Basically, Jessica did not care for my endorsement initially of Freemasons continuing to be a boys' club. Because it's not like dudes, it's just dudes playing poker, drinking old fashions, or sneaking away from their families. It's guys who are networking. They're sharing career opportunities, and historically, they've had a lot of prominent members, such as many presidents, who can really help your career. Now I know that's not currently the case, but it could be again. We don't know what powerful people are mingling as Masons right now, and since men have, historically had more career opportunities than women, does supporting this organization kind of support sexism in a way? It's a fair question to ask. And if you're a Freemason Timesucker, don't freak out. Please listen to this whole back and forth. Here are a few excerpts from Jessica's initial email. She says, "I know there was a lot of good stuff in the Freemason episode this week, but I couldn't hear any of it after your arguments for it being an all-male institution. It really upset me that you don't see why that might be harmful for women. In your example, you made a comparison between the Mocha Moms and the Freemasons. There really is no comparison. If the Mocha Moms were to expand to allow white males like you might gain a few new friends, you might hear some gossip, and get some advice on problems that women of color face. Pretty much nothing, I'm guessing you are super interested in. If the Freemasons were to expand to allow females like me, I would be able to gain an instant nationwide network that would help me get jobs, connect with important people in my field, chemical engineering, by the way, about 90% male, and learn from the collective wisdom of powerful people from the last several centuries. Pretty much all I want from life." Well, Jessica, I can't argue with that. Unfortunately, I also can't change history. And this is kind of some of what I, sent back to Jessica. I can't go back and create a female equivalent to the Freemasons. It is unfair to women, that historical divide. It is, but if we force fraternal organizations to open their doors to women, then we have to force women to open their group's doors to men. My wife attends a few meetings for women, some political, some relating to her job as a real estate agent. She values being able to share her thoughts in a women's only environment. She feels comfortable saying things there that she wouldn't say necessarily if men were present, and I wouldn't want to take that away from her. Here's another example. Comedian Eliza Schlesinger, she's being sued right now for turning away two men who wanted to attend a Girls' Night In show November 13th at the Largo at the Coronet Theater in Los Angeles. The show was advertised as a hybrid stand-up show, an interactive discussion between Eliza and the women in the audience aimed at giving women a place to vent in a supportive, fun, and inclusive environment. She invited all, women of all walks of life to come laugh with her and, be ready to share and feel safe for an awesome night of comedy and love. And 2 dudes are suing because they weren't allowed to attend. And I want to punch both of them in their fucking whiny faces. Why can't there be a women's only night? Because it violates California state discrimination laws. Now, laws that were passed for a good reason, I don't think this is a good example of those, good reasons. Now, imagine if that show was men's only. What if it was, go back to the Mocha Mom example, what if it was white men only? There would be more than a lawsuit. There would be national discussion. There would be protests and fucking outrage. And whoever put on that show would be a white supremacist. And again, I'm a guy who has no interest in ever creating a dude-only show, starting a dude-only group, let alone a white dude-only group. But freedom can't apply to only one certain gender, only one certain race. It doesn't make sense to me to combat racism and sexism by being racist and sexist. So what do? Do all groups have to let anyone and everyone join? Or as long as a group doesn't involve hiring employees or letting someone into a school or business or, can groups discriminate? Who gets to discriminate? Anyone? No one? Businesses can't do it. Is Eliza a business? Should social clubs be allowed to do it? Or is it time to end it for everyone? No Freemason fraternal order, no Mocha Moms, no other group of any type. Okay, so I kind of went back with that, and then Jessica came back with another email. She said, and here's, again, just some excerpts, maybe the answer is not to sort people by categories. Instead of using white, black, male, female as shorthand, we could define the Freemasons as a group for ambitious professionals in search of intellectual growth, and the all-female showing of Wonder Women for people who have felt oppressed in a patriarchal society. Especially in the modern society where gender is becoming more fluid, it might help more people to fit in, even if it is a lot harder to name a club or an event. Even the Boy Scouts are now allowing girls in if they want to learn the same things that Boy Scouts learn. I have been a part of a few women's groups myself, and I am always pleased when men come to take interest in the kinds of things we talk about in an effort to understand. And then Jessica added later in the email, at the same time, I do see your point about allowing private institutions people to exclude people from groups. I just feel like there should be a reason behind it. As long as a man is not disruptive of the purpose of a women's group, I would have no problem with him being there. Stay-at-home dads are included in mothering groups. Gay men are included into groups to gossip about men, and female video gamers are allowed into the gamer chat rooms. I would just like the same courtesy extended to me, where I am not excluded just because of a chromosome. If there were religious beliefs behind the male Freemasons or any visible reason beyond the fact that they wrote no women down on a piece of paper that also included defining the proper color, race, and religion, I could respect that. And later she signed off with, I really appreciate the ability to think this through further, even if probably it's just getting both of us entrenched in our own opinions. Future Space Lizard, Jessica. Well, thank you, Jessica. And we did share a lot of other nice things, too. That's what I love about this kind of back and forth, man. It can be very respectful. And a little bit of my response the end last night is just, maybe you're right. I said to Jessica, maybe the Freemasons just are not the right group to be all male. I do still believe in men's groups, women groups, etc. When it is not some type of support group, or when it is some type, of support group setting. But when it comes to transferring ancient knowledge and bettering one's life, maybe division by sex really just is sexist and an outdated way of thinking. Who knows? Maybe I'm really tired after a long day, or maybe you're changing and evolving my mind. And I realized talking to Jessica, I found myself defending Freemasons' right to be fraternal based on libertarian ideals, that I think people should be able to form whatever group they want. But I also realized on a personal level that if I were a Freemason, I don't think I'd give a shit if women were allowed in. So what do you think? This is an interesting discussion. Would it be a big deal to make Freemasons co-ed? Do men really need to have this particular group themselves? And if they do, or if they don't, what groups are okay to divide by sex? And again, reminder, Space Lizards take everybody. I don't care if you have 2 dicks and 4 vaginas. I don't care if you're half black, half white, and somehow also half Asian. I don't care if you're a right-wing Christian fundamentalist during the week and then an atheist Hollywood elite liberal on the weekend. If you're curious, you're fucking in. So that's where I stand on all of that. But I do want to hear from you about the Freemasons and more updates next week. Thank you, Jessica, Future Space Lizard, and thanks to all of you.
Thanks, time suckers. I needed that.
We all did.
So that is it for today, time suckers. So don't kill millions of people this week. Don't have a 13-year-old girlfriend unless you're also around the age of 13. Listen to my new stand-up album, Maybe I'm the Problem, for free on Pandora. Do it. And even more important, sign up to become a Space Lizard now and keep on sucking.